Have you ever wondered why a book quoted in the Bible by Jesus' own apostles was later banned and buried for nearly 2,000 years? Or why a book held sacred by early Christians was suddenly labeled heresy, not because it was false, but because it said too much? What if I told you that hidden within this ancient text is a story so explosive, so radically different from everything you've ever heard in church that it threatens to rewrite the story of human history and reveal a truth about our origin we were never supposed to know? This isn't fiction. This isn't conspiracy. This is the Book of Enoch. It tells of beings who came from the stars, not angels, not demons, but powerful, intelligent entities called the Watchers, who descended to Earth, took human wives, and created a race of giants. And the most shocking part? Genesis 6 confirms it in just 2 verses. The rest of the story? That's what Enoch dared to write. And for that, it was buried. In Genesis 5:24, it reads, "Enoch walked with God. Then he was no more because God took him away." But in the original Hebrew, it doesn't say God. It says Elohim, a plural word. It means the powerful ones. That one mistranslation changed everything. Because once you understand that Elohim refers to multiple non-human entities, not one singular God, you begin to see the Bible in a whole new light. So why was this truth removed from the official canon? And what does it reveal about our true origins? If you've ever felt like there's more to the human story than what we're being told, this video is for you. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, do you think Earth has ever been visited by beings from beyond the stars? If this has you questioning everything, hit like and make sure you're subscribed, because what's coming next will shake your worldview.
So, who exactly were the Watchers? According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers weren't just angels. They were Elohim, beings of immense power, intelligence, and influence. They weren't entirely divine, but they weren't fully human either. They were somewhere in between, and that's what made them dangerous. Enoch tells us that 200 of these beings descended to Earth. They didn't come down for worship. They came with desire. Desire for human women. They broke an ancient boundary. They interbred with human females, something they were never supposed to do. And the result? A race of hybrids, giants, the Nephilim. If that sounds like something from Greek mythology, you're not wrong. The Greek Titans were described the same way, offspring of gods and mortals, beings of enormous size and strength. In India, we hear of the Asuras, giant beings in conflict with the gods. In Sumerian texts, they're called the Anunnaki. Different names, same pattern. This is where the Bible gets quiet. In Genesis 6, it simply says, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took them as wives, and giants were born to them." And then it moves on, as if nothing happened. No explanation, no context. That's where Enoch fills in the blanks. He gives us the missing detail, how the Watchers taught humanity things we weren't ready for, how they introduced forbidden knowledge, metalworking, enchantments, seduction, astrology. They weren't just breaking rules, they were altering the course of human civilization. But why was this story erased? Because it introduced too many gods, too many beings with power. And when later editors of the Hebrew Bible, especially during the Babylonian exile, were shaping a strict monotheistic worldview, these kinds of stories had to go. Let me put it like this. Imagine finding out that the founding story of your nation had help from outsiders, powerful outsiders. That kind of revelation doesn't just change your story, it threatens your identity. And maybe that's why the Watchers had to disappear from official history. But here's what's most important. These stories weren't discarded because they lacked meaning. They were discarded because they had too much meaning. They opened doors the religious authorities weren't ready to walk through. And once you realize that, you start to ask, if the Watchers were erased, who else have we forgotten? Well, across the oceans, in West Africa and ancient Babylon, the stories never stopped. In fact, they tell of aquatic beings that sound eerily familiar. Let's go there next.
Now, let's take a journey, not just through history, but across continents. Because while the Book of Enoch was buried in caves in the Middle East, its core story quietly echoed in the myths and memories of people all over the world. Let me tell you about a young woman in Ghana. One day, she vanished while walking along the beach near her hometown. No one saw her leave. No trace. For 3 years, her family searched until one day she simply returned. But what she told them was not the story of someone who got lost. She said she had been taken by beings from beneath the sea. They weren't human. They were part of an ancient race known as the Mami Wata, beings who live in underwater cities who take humans for a purpose. She said they made her bear children. She had lived among them, and she was changed. Now that might sound strange, maybe even impossible. But here's the thing. Stories like hers exist all along the west coast of Africa, through the Caribbean, and even into South America. Mami Wata isn't one story, it's hundreds. Always the same themes. Aquatic beings, beautiful and powerful, part human, part something else. They abduct, they teach, they sometimes reward, but they never quite belong to our world. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. In ancient Babylon, they had another name, the Apkallu. These were fish-like beings, half man, half aquatic, who emerged from the sea to teach early humans the foundations of civilization, agriculture, astronomy, law, writing. One of them, named ONS, would rise from the waters each day, teach mankind, then return to the depths each night. Thousands of miles away, with no connection to Africa or Mesopotamia, the stories remain the same. In form and function, Mami Wata, Apkallu, and ONS are almost identical. So how is it that cultures with no shared language, no shared trade, no shared religion all tell stories of fish beings who came from the waters and changed the course of human history? It challenges everything we think we know about myth. Maybe these weren't just stories passed down to entertain. Maybe they were memories. Fragments of something real, buried in oral tradition, told in symbols we could understand. And here's the small but powerful truth tucked in all of this. When stories repeat across cultures, across continents, and across millennia, we should stop calling them myths. We should start calling them clues. Because these clues might just be pointing toward a deeper reality, one where the visitors from the stars didn't always come from above, but sometimes from below. And this raises a question we can't ignore. If these beings really came to guide us, what exactly did they teach? That brings us to the next chapter, because one man, thousands of years ago, claimed to be taught by them directly. His name was Ezekiel, and what he saw will leave you speechless.
Let's step into the shoes of a man named Ezekiel. He lived 2,600 years ago, a prophet, a priest, a man of deep conviction. One day, something happened to him, something so strange, so overwhelming, that he couldn't speak for 7 days afterward. In Ezekiel chapter 1, he tries to describe it. But remember, he didn't have modern words, no jet, no engine, no metal alloy. So he used what he knew: symbols, emotion, pure wonder. He said he saw a great cloud with fire flashing back and forth, and a gleaming metal that shone like glowing amber. There were wheels within wheels, spinning in every direction, wings that roared like a rushing river, and inside, a throne, and on that throne, someone who looked human. Now pause for a moment. If a person today described that exact experience, what would we say? Probably this: they just saw a UFO. But Ezekiel didn't have that term, so he called it the glory of the Lord. He didn't know what else to call it, because when you see something beyond your understanding, your only choice is to describe what you felt. Interestingly, he never once said it was a dream. He gave details: where he was, what time it happened, where he went, what cities he flew over, and the mental state he was in afterward. He said he was so disoriented he couldn't speak for an entire week. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. While flying in this craft, yes, flying, he describes a pilot. He says he was like a son of man, human, but not quite. And while this being tried to talk to him about religion, about morality, and the future of Israel, Ezekiel couldn't stop marveling at the machine itself. He kept asking, "What is this metal? How do these wheels turn? What is that roaring sound?" It sounds so much like a modern witness trying to explain advanced technology with a Bronze Age vocabulary. NASA engineer Joseph Blumrich thought the same thing. He was skeptical until he studied Ezekiel's account line by line. In the end, he published a book titled The Spaceships of Ezekiel, where he reconstructed the craft based on Ezekiel's descriptions. A NASA engineer taking a biblical vision seriously enough to reverse engineer it. So here's the question: was Ezekiel describing a metaphor, a dream, or was he describing something real, something mechanical, something not of this world? And maybe, just maybe, that's why apocalyptic literature like Ezekiel's was never meant to be interpreted only as poetry, because apocalypse doesn't mean the end of the world. It means an unveiling, a revealing of something hidden. And what Ezekiel saw might not have been divine in the way we've been taught, but extraterrestrial in ways we're only now starting to understand. There's a lesson here. When someone describes something that doesn't fit our box, we're quick to label it hallucination, delusion, or just symbolic. But maybe, like Ezekiel, they're just doing their best to describe something that hasn't happened to us yet. So what happens when multiple ancient figures describe not just visions, but journeys through space, guided by non-human beings? In the next section, we return to Enoch and discover what he was shown far beyond Earth in a journey that might reveal our true place in the universe.
Let's go back to Enoch for a moment, not just as a prophet, but as a traveler. Because in the Book of Enoch, something extraordinary happens. He's taken on a journey, not just through cities or mountains, but through the cosmos. He's shown the movements of the stars, the paths of the sun and moon, and the nature of eclipses. Now pause and consider. This was written over 2,000 years ago, long before telescopes, satellites, or even the scientific method. And yet, Enoch describes the moon's orbit around the Earth. He explains that the moon doesn't shine on its own, it reflects the light of the sun.
He speaks of solar and lunar eclipses, of cycles and alignments, of heavenly laws that govern time itself. How could someone in the ancient world possibly know these things? In the Book of Luminaries, part of the Book of Enoch, he's guided by a being named Uriel, not an angel with wings and a harp, but a teacher, a cosmic instructor. Uriel walks Enoch through what we might now call celestial mechanics. He teaches him how light moves, how time is measured in the heavens, and how the universe follows a rhythm one humanity had barely begun to grasp. But here's where it gets even stranger. In West Africa, the Dogon people of Mali tell a story of a visitation long ago from beings who came from the Sirius star system. The Dogon, without any telescopes, somehow knew that Sirius wasn't just one star, but a binary system with a tiny, dense companion star called Sirius B, a fact confirmed by Western astronomy only in the 20th century. So how did the Dogon know? They said the knowledge came from visitors, from teachers who came from the stars. Sound familiar? Enoch's guide Uriel could very well be the same type of entity. Not a deity in the religious sense, but an advanced being, passing knowledge down to someone ready to receive it. And this is where all the pieces start to fit. From the Dogon in Africa, to the Mayans in Central America, to the Babylonians and their star charts, to Enoch walking through the galaxy with Uriel. They all describe advanced astronomical knowledge, far ahead of its time, given not just by human discovery, but through contact. So here's the quiet little truth hidden in all this. Sometimes, knowledge doesn't just evolve. Sometimes, it's given. And if that's the case, if the Book of Enoch records not just spiritual visions, but real cosmic lessons, then we have to ask, why would someone give us that knowledge? What purpose did it serve? Maybe it was a gift, or maybe it was a warning. Because as we'll see next, not all of these visitors came in peace. Some had their own agenda. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when human beings are taken and what they sometimes come back with.
Let me ask you something. What if a person disappeared and came back different? Not just traumatized or shaken, but with knowledge they never had before. This isn't the plot of a sci-fi movie. It's a pattern that's been quietly surfacing across the world. There's a man, 1 degree removed from the speaker in our story, who vanished for a time and later returned with something strange. Not a wild tale of aliens or lights in the sky, but a notebook. Inside, pages upon pages of advanced calculus, formulas, equations, concepts he had never studied and couldn't explain how he understood. He wasn't a mathematician, he hadn't gone to college, but something had changed in him. He could solve problems even seasoned engineers had to pause over. He didn't come back claiming to be chosen. He didn't seek fame. In fact, he barely talked about it at all. And that's the pattern. People who've had these so-called close encounters rarely tell their stories. Not because they don't want to, but because they're afraid no one will believe them. Or worse, they're afraid they'll be labeled crazy. But neuroscience tells us something very real might be happening here. There's a phenomenon called acquired savant syndrome, a rare condition where, after a head injury or a traumatic event, someone suddenly develops extraordinary abilities. Art, memory, music, math, gifts that seem to come out of nowhere. Doctors like Dr. Daryl Treffert, who studied this for decades, believe it's not magic, it's unlocking. The human brain has layers of potential we don't normally access. And here's the twist.
Many who claim to have been abducted or taken somewhere beyond report similar outcomes: enhanced perception, higher intelligence, a sudden fluency in subjects they'd never studied. The Mamiwata legends speak of this too. They say when someone is taken underwater, they may return with heightened consciousness. Sometimes they come back as healers, sometimes as visionaries. Sometimes they never speak about what happened at all. So what's going on here? Maybe not every contact is an invasion. Maybe some are initiations, a forced awakening, one that's jarring, terrifying, but also transformative. And that's the small but powerful lesson tucked inside these stories. Sometimes what breaks us also opens us. And sometimes the ones who return are the ones who've seen a world we're not ready to believe in yet. So the real question is, why aren't we talking about this more? Why do we mock or ignore the voices of those who say, "I've seen something"? Why do we turn away when someone brings back a gift we can't explain? Maybe it's time we stopped dismissing them and started listening. Because as we're about to discover, even the world's most powerful institutions have been paying attention, quietly. In the next chapter, we'll explore what the Vatican, Harvard, and even the Pentagon have to say about all this. And it might just change everything.
It's easy to assume stories of contact and abduction only live on the fringe, that they're confined to late-night radio, conspiracy blogs, or whispered campfire tales. But what if I told you some of the most respected institutions on Earth have been quietly listening to? Let's start with Harvard. In the 1990s, the U.S. Department of Defense approached Dr. John Mack, head of clinical psychology at Harvard Medical School. His mission? To evaluate military personnel who had reported encounters with non-human entities. These weren't unstable civilians. These were trained pilots, soldiers, radar operators, people whose careers depended on precision and credibility. Dr. Mack expected to find trauma, maybe even mental illness, but what he discovered shocked him. These men and women weren't hallucinating. They weren't delusional. They were describing something real, something that changed them emotionally, psychologically, even neurologically. In fact, Mack would go on to say, "These people have experienced something that can't be explained by conventional psychology, and we must take them seriously." Now, let's shift gears from Harvard to the Vatican. In 2009, under Pope Benedict XVI, the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences held a private colloquium. 30 scholars, theologians, and astronomers gathered to discuss one very specific question. What are the theological implications of contact with extraterrestrial life? Among them was Monsignor Corrado Balducci, a Vatican exorcist and expert in paranormal phenomena. He made a bold statement, one that raised eyebrows. When people report contact with non-human beings, they are not describing demonic possession or psychosis. They are encountering something altogether different, a new kind of intelligence. Let that sink in for a moment. The Catholic Church, with 2,000 years of theological caution, was quietly acknowledging the possibility of other forms of life and taking reports of contact seriously. And then there's the Pentagon. In recent years, the U.S. government has publicly admitted what it long kept secret. There are aerial phenomena, UAPs as they now call them, that defy all known technology. Military videos, once classified, have now been released. They show objects rotating mid-air, dropping thousands of feet in seconds, vanishing without a trace. And even more telling, pilots trained to remain calm under missile fire have admitted on record that what they saw shook them to their core. So here's the point. When Harvard studies the witnesses, when the Vatican debates the theology, and when the Pentagon releases the footage, that's not science fiction, that's a signal. A signal that we've moved past the question of, is something happening, and into the deeper question of, what does it mean? The world is waking up, slowly, quietly, unevenly, but it's happening. And here's the small lesson in all this. Truth doesn't just explode onto the world stage. It seeps in through the cracks of institutions, through reluctant admissions, through the courage of a few who dare to speak first. So if the elite of science, faith, and military are starting to take these ancient and modern accounts seriously, maybe it's time we asked, why was the Book of Enoch banned in the first place? And what truth was so dangerous it had to be buried? Let's go deeper into that next.
Now that we've seen how even Harvard, the Vatican, and the Pentagon are opening their eyes, it's time to ask a deeper question. If the Book of Enoch was so important, if it explained the Nephilim, the Watchers, even cosmic knowledge, why was it banned? Why did the early church treat it as sacred, only for it to vanish from the Bible we have today? To answer that, we need to go back in time, specifically to the 6th century BCE. This was a period of crisis for ancient Israel. They had been conquered, their leaders exiled in Babylon, and their entire belief system about God, creation, and destiny was being restructured. In that moment, Jewish scholars and scribes made a bold decision. They edited and organized the Hebrew Scriptures to emphasize monotheism, one God, one truth, one power. And the Book of Enoch, it didn't fit, because Enoch didn't describe just one being of power. He described many, the Elohim, the Watchers, the Nephilim, and Uriel. It told a story of multiple intelligent beings involved in shaping human history. That was just too dangerous for the emerging doctrine. It was too uncomfortable. So they set it aside. Centuries later, when the early Christian church began forming its own canon, the same pattern repeated. Yes, the Book of Enoch was still quoted. In fact, the book of Jude in the New Testament literally cites Enoch word for word. Church fathers like Tertullian, Justin Martyr, and Clement of Alexandria treated it as scripture. But by the 4th century, the institutional church faced pressure to simplify, to consolidate beliefs under a single authority, a single narrative. And Enoch's vivid stories of alien-like beings, forbidden unions, and off-world journeys, they raised too many questions. So the church quietly left it out of the official canon. But not everyone did. To this day, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church still includes the Book of Enoch in their Bible. They never stopped reading it, never stopped honoring it, because they saw what others chose to forget. And here's the quiet truth. The Book of Enoch wasn't banned because it was false. It was banned because it was too real, too full of detail, too bold in what it revealed, too disruptive to a carefully crafted worldview. Sometimes truth is removed not to hide lies, but to protect power. That's the lesson here. And it's one we've seen before in science, in politics, even in culture. When a story threatens the structure, it gets silenced. But stories have a funny way of surviving. And the Book of Enoch,
It never really disappeared. It just waited. In caves, in scrolls, in whispers passed down through generations. Until now. So what exactly did this forbidden book reveal? Let's turn the page, because what we find next is a story not just about the past, but about the future of humanity itself.
Let's take a moment and ask something simple but profound. How did we, as a species, go from hunter-gatherers with stone tools to building cities, temples, writing legal codes, measuring the stars and trading across continents almost overnight in historical terms? Historians call it the Sumerian leap, because out of nowhere, around 3000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, civilization just exploded. They had written language, not just words, but contracts, tax records, poems, star charts. They had complex math. They built massive ziggurats aligned to celestial bodies. They had banking systems, irrigation canals, and legal courts. And the question is, where did all this come from? Was it just a natural evolution? A random burst of genius? Or was there help? Here is where the Book of Enoch and stories from all over the world start to come together. Enoch says he was shown the secrets of heaven by a being named Uriel. He was taught astronomy, the rhythm of time, and the movement of the stars. He didn't discover it. He was taught. And that same theme repeats in the Sumerian tablets. The gods, or sky beings, often called the Anunnaki, descended from above and gave humanity the gifts of civilization, agriculture, architecture, astronomy, law. The Maya say something similar. So do the Dogon, the Zulu, the Cherokee, and the Egyptians. Different lands, different languages, but the same claim. We didn't learn this alone. It was passed down from the stars. Even Carl Sagan, the famed astrophysicist and skeptic, once wrote in a 1962 paper, "There is statistical likelihood that Earth was visited by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization at least once during historical times." Carl Sagan, Direct Contact Among Galactic Civilizations. He wasn't saying it did happen. He was saying it's plausible based on mathematics and probability. So when we look at the timeline of human development, here's what we see. Tens of thousands of years of slow, steady progress, followed by a sudden surge in knowledge, technology, and structure. And when we ask ancient people where it came from, they all point up. Now, of course, mainstream academia still sees this as symbolic, metaphorical. But maybe we've been interpreting it backwards. Maybe the stories weren't poetic exaggerations of human brilliance. Maybe they were honest memories of contact. Here's the quiet lesson inside this giant leap. We're taught to believe that greatness comes from within, and often it does. But sometimes the next step forward comes when something outside of us reaches in, whether you call that inspiration, divine guidance, or something else. And maybe that's what happened to us as a species. So the question becomes, if we were helped once before, could it happen again? Or maybe it already has. In the next chapter, we'll explore the ripple effects of this ancient contact, not just what we received, but what we were never meant to know.
So here we are. We've traveled through ancient texts, lost traditions, hidden science, and global myths. We've heard from prophets, priests, abductees, and professors. And now we're left with one final question. Is the veil finally lifting? For generations, humanity has lived with a quiet tension, a sense that something about our story just doesn't add up, a feeling that there's more out there, more to us than we've been told. But we've been taught to suppress it, taught to laugh at aliens, to roll our eyes at people who talk about being taken or taught or shown things they couldn't possibly know. And yet, those stories persist. They show up in every culture, every century, every corner of the earth, not as fantasy, but as memory. Think about it. Tens of thousands go missing every year, many never found. And while yes, some are explained, others vanish in ways no search party, no forensic team, no theory can account for. Some are even witnessed disappearing, mid-conversation, mid-step, gone as if plucked from our world. And those who return, they often carry a strange weight, not just trauma, but knowledge, sometimes a gift, sometimes a burden, always a story they hesitate to share. But today, something's shifting. People are speaking up, scholars are listening, governments are releasing footage, and ancient texts like the Book of Enoch are being dusted off and read with new eyes. It's as if the things we once locked away, out of fear, control, or misunderstanding, are rising to the surface again. And here's the deeper truth. We're not just recovering lost information, we're reclaiming something more essential, our curiosity. The willingness to ask, what if? What if we're not alone? What if we never were? What if the Watchers, the Mamiwata, the Apkallu, and Uriel weren't metaphors, but visitors? What if Enoch wasn't a myth, but a witness? And what if this generation, our generation, is the one that finally listens? Because maybe the stories of the past weren't meant to stay in the past. Maybe they were breadcrumbs, left for those bold enough to follow. And maybe that's you. So the veil? Yes, I believe it's lifting. Quietly, gently, but undeniably. And if you felt that, if something in you stirred while listening, then maybe, just maybe, you were meant to be part of the remembering. If this journey resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What part struck you the most? What questions are you now carrying? Make sure to like and subscribe, because we're not done, not even close. There's a lot more to uncover, and together, we'll keep pulling back the curtain. Thank you for walking through the mystery with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and never stop asking, what if the old stories were true?